Konbanwa, ladies and gentlemen. My name is the Advocate, and today I'm an advocate for Mistborn, The Final Empire, a book review. What's this? A book from a series that is actually complete? What madness is this? The right kind of madness. Mistborn, The Final Empire, or simply Mistborn, which is how it seems to be marketed these days, is the first book in the very much complete Mistborn Era 1 trilogy. Written by the ever-popular Brandon Sanderson, Mistborn, The Final Empire was released on July 17, 2006. And as sad as it sounds, this is the first Brandon Sanderson book I've ever read. Better late than never, I suppose. Now, the designation of what constitutes a Mistborn book might be a little confusing for some readers, so allow me to explain. Mistborn itself is actually a fantasy series that encompasses multiple volumes, all taking place within different eras. Each era consists of either a trilogy or a quadrilogy. Mistborn, The Final Empire, which is the book I'm currently holding right here in my hand, is the first book of the first trilogy, which is referred to as Mistborn Era 1. With me so far? Now, the story in which the Mistborn series takes place in is part of an even greater world created by Mr. Sanderson called the Cosmere. We're not going to delve too deeply into the mechanics of the Cosmere, as that's not what this video is about, but essentially the Cosmere is this large shared fictional universe where many of Brandon's books take place. Elantris, Mistborn, Warbreaker, Stormlight Archive, all those series occur within this one Cosmere universe and are bound by the rules established within. That's right. There were other works of art that were delving into shared fictional universes long before the Marvel Cinematic Universe came to be. Now, if this is your first time reading a Brando Sando book, then I can completely understand how you may feel hesitant in reading one of his books, as entering into this large literary universe sounds potentially intimidating. But don't worry, Brandon has made it abundantly clear that you don't need to have previous knowledge of the broader Cosmere universe in order to understand or enjoy one of his books. The Cosmere is merely supplementary and predominantly there just to reward readers who have read other books within this same universe. Having said that, if you have not read a Sanderson book before but already know that you want to go all in on this Cosmere universe, then Mistborn, The Final Empire is a good starting point. Plot-wise, The Final Empire is the most accessible book in Sanderson's repertoire. Additionally, a few characters and Easter eggs that pop up in some of Sanderson's other series branch off from narrative threads established within this book. So if you're gung-ho about delving into Brando Sando's full catalog, then this is indeed the book to start with. Now, as far as The Final Empire goes, and what I think about this book, Cosmere notwithstanding, I liked it. Simple, nothing too complex, but effective. It was good. Let's break it down. Before we delve any further into this video, just want to let you guys know that the first part of this video will be spoiler-free. If you have not read Mistborn, The Final Empire, then worry not, for I will only be lightly touching on material from this book in the vaguest of senses. The second part of this video, however, will contain my thoughts on some of the spoilers, and I'll let you guys know when we get to that point. Timestamps have been provided in the description below, so feel free to skip around to get to the part of the video you're most interested in. Alright, let's roll. The best way I can describe The Final Empire is it's a mix between Ocean's 11 and Star Wars. The story takes place in a dystopian world where the hero of legend from long ago once tried to save the world and unfortunately failed. Consequently, the world fell into ruin and has since been polluted by ash and mist for the past 1,000 years, not unlike the ash and pollution here you see in the background. The people of the Final Empire live in a very oppressed society that reflects a sort of class system ruled by a villainous dictator known as the Lord Ruler. The Lord Ruler's vassals make up the upper-class nobility who are descendants of the people who helped the Lord Ruler achieve his power 1,000 years prior. They rule over the peasant-class common folk known as the Ska, who make up the largest percentage of the Final Empire's populace. Contrary to the nobility, the Ska are the descendants of the people who opposed the Lord Ruler all those years ago. The Ska are enslaved by the nobility and forced to toil in difficult labor conditions in order to keep the Final Empire running. Things are pretty depressing in this world. However, hope springs eternal as our main character Kelsier looks to do something about this dismal way of life. Additionally, deep within the lowliest of the brutal caste system, a young teenage girl named Vin discovers that she may have what it takes to not only escape her horrible predicament, but actually be part of a movement to overthrow the current regime and end oppression for a long, long time. Now, when I summarize the plot like this, it all sounds very standard fare for a fantasy story. And truth be told, yeah, this book doesn't really reinvent the wheel or do anything crazy that redefines a genre. But although the story of this book is rather traditional, Brandon Sanderson does a very good job of telling the story and executing it rather well, particularly within the last 150 pages of this book. The book does follow an established, let's all band together and overthrow the evil regime kind of thing, which has admittedly been done to death many times before. But where Sanderson excels is the world with which this plotline occurs, and the magic system which will not only be a crutch for our plucky heroes, but for our villains as well. Without delving too deeply into spoilers, a few characters within this world have a natural affinity to magic, which is referred to as allomancy. A magic system that uses metals and alloys, with each metal granting a specific ability. And although it's not the most complex magic system out there, Brandon does get a lot of mileage out of this allomantic form of magic. There are some thrilling set pieces within this book where Sanderson really gets to stretch his literary muscles and allow the magic to work in tandem with the story in order to give the action scenes a little extra oomph.
With that, he threw himself off the roof. Vin followed, her cloak tassels spraying rainwater. She burned pewter as she fell and hit the ground with allomantically strengthened legs. Kelsier took off at a dash and she followed. Her speed on the wet cobblestones would have been reckless, but her pewter-fueled muscles reacted with precision, strength, and balance. She ran in the wet, misty night, burning tin and copper. One to let her see, the other to let her hide.
Despite its simplicity, there's hidden layers of complexity to the way each allomantic metal can be used. Although Sanderson, and by extension the characters, do appear to take full advantage of the magic system established within, you can tell that the author has only scratched the surface of what can be done with allomancy. And I'll be very curious to see how the later Mistborn books iterate on the allomancy we've seen so far. As I mentioned previously, the book's magic system helps accentuate the action, and this book has a lot of action, which does activate the dopamine in the dumb poo-poo part of my brain. Don't get me wrong, I do love grounded political series that happen to take place in a fantasy world, but I feel that a lot of modern fantasy authors have become too afraid to embrace the magical side of the fantasy genre. It is fantasy, after all. Why not use the tools that the genre is known for to their full advantage? The Final Empire doesn't shy away from high fantasy and fully espouses what it preaches through some heart-racing action that proliferates many parts of this book. Several fights and magic battles get the blood pumping, and they're quite possibly the best parts of the book. Now, with all that said, I should bring up that although the story does move along at a good pace with some engaging battle sequences littered throughout, new readers should be aware that the way the book's story is told might not be your cup of tea. Many readers are bothered by Brandon Sanderson's writing style, and after reading The Final Empire, I can definitely see why. The way in which Brandon tells his stories isn't anything that I would consider pretty. Certainly the man will set a scene for you and give you a decent enough picture in your head of what he wants to describe, but his descriptions rarely go anything beyond simplistic. Here are a few examples.
The room was decorated with a sturdy wooden armoire and even had a circular rug. He had retired with several friends to keep Lacal's Gentleman's Lounge, a small chamber adjacent to the ballroom. It was furnished in deep green colors, and the chairs were comfortable. The Venture main hall was a grand and imposing sight, 4 or 5 daunting stories high. The hall was several times as long as it was wide. Enormous rectangular stained glass windows ran in rows along the hall, and the strange, powerful lights outside shone on them directly, throwing a cascade of colors across the room.
Brandon is rather utilitarian with his use of prose. He tells you only as much as you need to know for you to get a vague enough picture of the scene he's trying to paint for you in your head, before quickly moving on to the next scene. His straightforward descriptions get the job done for sure, but it's fairly unattractive and almost mechanical. Now, personally, I don't mind his style. Poetry is great, but when that's all there is to a book, I get bored rather quickly. Brandon's economical use of prose certainly is noticeable, especially when compared to some of the more flowery language used in series like Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle. However, I'm a proponent of the fact that the meat and potatoes of the book should always be within its story and not with its prose. And Brandon is very clearly a plot over prose kind of guy. I do have to say, however, that although I'm sure it was unintentional, It's almost ironic how well the fairly muted and limited descriptive way the book story is told complements the dull and ashen world of the final empire.
In the distance, the setting sun became ablaze, its ruddy light illuminating clouds and smoke alike.
It's quite interesting. Now, despite the fact that I don't take issue with this book's simplistic prose, one critique I do have of the story are the simplistic characters. With the exception of our main duo of Kelsier and Vin, there's really not much in the way of substance with many of our side characters. It often seems like they are merely there to fill a role and nothing more. The grizzled serious man, the comic relief, the snobbish noblewoman, side characters aren't really expanded upon beyond their base personality trait. Now, part of that is the fact that a grand majority of the book only follows either Kelsier or Vin in a limited third-person point of view. However, Game of Thrones also uses this limited third-person, follow one POV at a time form of storytelling, and yet most of the side characters in that book are quite layered. This story doesn't really give our supporting cast anything beyond expository dialogue and the occasional joke. In fact, if you cover up the names of half these characters, you can't really tell who's saying what. A lot of the side characters' dialogue is interchangeable and could be said by anyone. Maybe the side characters receive more depth in the next book, The Well of Ascension, but as far as the Final Empire goes, they're essentially just chess pieces for the plot. But that aside, I still came away from Mistborn Book 1 with a positive experience. Despite its simplicity, there's a lot to like about this book, and I look forward to seeing what happens in the next book, Mistborn Book 2. So with all that said, guys, this is the part of the video where we delve into spoilers. If you have not read Mistborn: The Final Empire, then I strongly encourage you to click on the timestamp below to skip to the conclusion of this video because I'm about to ruin some things you probably don't want ruined. You've been warned. Alright, spoilers starting now. So either I'm a genius, unlikely, or maybe I've read one too many fantasy books to the point where I can anticipate these things now, but I saw Kelsier's death coming from a mile away. Now, Kelsier's death is done rather well, and his absence does potentially open up many story threads for the next couple of books. But I can't shake the fact that I predicted his death by the hands of the Lord Ruler fairly early on in the story, and lo and behold, that's what happened. Now, there's nothing wrong with a little predictability, and maybe Sanderson did intend to heavily telegraph Kelsier's fate. When Kelsier delivers his I Am Hope address close to the end of the book, it does sound like the speech of a martyr.
But you can't kill me, Lord Tyrant. I represent that thing you've never been able to kill, no matter how hard you try. I am hope.
But it is a trope. Star Wars, Spider-Man, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, The Count of Monte Cristo. The old mentor who helps young apprentice learn and grow before he gets killed off by a villain has been done many times in many other series before Mistborn's release. Now, just because something is overdone doesn't make it bad. There are ways to take established tropes and provide a fresh twist on the formula to make it feel new. This book, however, it does Kelsier's death justice for sure, but it doesn't really bring anything new to the table that hasn't been done before. Another quibble I have with this book is that Sanderson rarely ever allows the subtext to just be subtext. The Kelsier bit I quoted earlier is a big example of something that I think is best left unsaid. Not because Kelsier's martyrdom is bad or anything, it's just that I already got the implication that Kelsier is a hero who is here to save the Ska. I don't need the book to spell it out for me and tell me how I'm supposed to feel or view Kelsier. And it's not the only time. There's other examples of this "let me clarify everything for you" text throughout the book.
Several women were looking at her, yet it didn't feel like they were seeing her at all. They were studying the gown, the hair, and the jewelry. Vin glanced to the other side where a group of younger men were watching her. They saw the neckline, the pretty dress, and the makeup, but they didn't see her. None of them could see Vin. They could only see the face she had put on, the face she wanted them to see. They saw Lady Valette. It was as if Vin weren't there, as if she were hiding right in front of their eyes.
In Japanese, there's an expression called kukiyomenai, which translates to "can't read the air." The phrase is typically used in personal settings to describe someone who cannot read subtlety or body language. They can't take the hint and need what doesn't need to be said to be directly communicated to them. This book doesn't think its audience can read the air, and therefore will spell out all the subtlety for you. Now, I know within the context of the story, Vin is having this internal monologue, so of course she would be trying to puzzle out the metaphorical implication of her nobility facade with herself. But I, as the reader, don't need it spelled out for me as well. Hiding in plain sight is an interesting discussion point for someone to puzzle out after completing the book. However, the theme loses a lot of its significance when it's spelled out for the reader. It's as if Brandon is telling us how to see or think about a situation or a scene, and I honestly don't like it. The last item I want to discuss is the self contained nature of this story. Drawing comparisons to Star Wars again, the Final Empire, similar to Star Wars A New Hope, can actually function as a self contained narrative. Although Brandon always intended for Mistborn Era 1 to be a trilogy, Book 1 wraps up the immediate story rather neatly. Vin effectively kills off the Lord Ruler, and by the end of the story, we are left with only a few unanswered questions. The book can function as a standalone novel, and I honestly was not expecting that. So, if that was the intention, then good job, Mr. Sanderson. So, all in all, Mistborn the Final Empire is a rather enjoyable book. It's admittedly predictable, the characters aren't the most complex, and the prose does occasionally read like young adult fiction, but the story it tells rather well. And when the action gets going, it really gets going. It's definitely worth picking up if you have the chance, especially if you want to get plugged into Sanderson's Cosmere universe. The only thing new readers need to be wary of is that this book is pretty violent. There are occasional graphic descriptions of death and dismemberment that may be inappropriate for some readers. I definitely would not recommend this book for anyone under the age of 13. But thank you once again for making it this far into the video, ladies and gentlemen. If you liked my review, if you could do me a huge favor, if you would consider subscribing to my channel. YouTube Studio regularly shows me the analytics, and it tells me that a large percentage of my viewers aren't subscribed. Your subscriptions really do help me out, guys, so I would really greatly appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and stay tuned for more fantasy book reviews in the near future. But until then, thank you once again for watching, ladies and gentlemen. Like, comment, subscribe, and until next time, The Advocate, out.